Becoming is not an act of addition, it is an act of subtraction. This truth is difficult for most to accept because it contradicts everything the modern world teaches. We are told to add skills, add habits, add knowledge, add confidence, add motivation, as if becoming someone greater is a matter of piling more onto an already unstable structure. But growth does not work this way. Anything overloaded without reinforcement collapses. Anything corrupted at the foundation cannot be elevated safely. Before something stronger can rise, something weaker must fall. Every meaningful transformation in nature follows this law. Forests burn so new growth can emerge. Muscles tear so they can rebuild stronger. Old stars collapse before new elements are formed. Destruction is not an error in the process, it is the process. Yet when it comes to the self, people resist this law fiercely. They want progress without loss, evolution without discomfort, rebirth without death. They want to keep every habit, every excuse, every comforting lie, and still become someone greater. This is impossible. You cannot carry an old self into a new life. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when you sense that your current identity has expired. Not because you failed, but because you stayed the same for too long. You wake up with the same thoughts, you react the same way, you repeat the same explanations to yourself. Days blur into weeks, weeks into years. Nothing collapses dramatically, yet nothing truly grows either. This is the most dangerous state a person can inhabit. Stable stagnation. It is not pain that forces change. Pain can be endured indefinitely. It is clarity that demands action. Clarity arrives when you realize that the life you are living is not the life you are capable of living, and that the gap between the two is not fate, luck, or circumstance, but the structures you refuse to dismantle. Stoicism does not offer comfort here, it offers responsibility. The Stoics understood that character is forged, not gifted, that strength is built by removal, not indulgence, that the greatest enemy is not adversity, but the internal compromises that make adversity unbearable. They did not ask how to feel better, they asked how to live correctly. And living correctly often requires the courage to destroy parts of yourself that once kept you safe, but now keep you small.
This work is not gentle, it is not performative, and it does not ask for approval. It begins with the first and most insidious obstacle of all, the destruction of excuses. Excuses are not harmless explanations, they are agreements with stagnation. Every excuse you make is a contract you sign with the version of yourself that fears effort more than regret. Excuses sound reasonable, they are polite, they often contain facts. That is why they are dangerous. A lie that announces itself as a lie has little power, but a lie wrapped in logic, circumstance, and self-compassion can govern an entire life. An excuse does not say, "I refuse to grow." It says, "Now is not the right time." And that sentence has ended more lives than failure ever did. Excuses protect comfort by postponing responsibility. They give you a story to tell yourself so you can avoid confronting the simple truth that something within your control remains undone. The Stoics were ruthless about this, not cruel, precise. They believed clarity was an act of mercy because confusion prolongs suffering. To excuse yourself is to fragment your authority. Each time you say, "I'll start when things calm down," you teach your mind that discipline is conditional. Each time you say, "I'm just not built for this," you outsource responsibility to identity. Each time you say, "Others had it easier," you hand control to comparison. Over time, these patterns form a structure, a comfortable, well-defended prison built not of bars, but of explanations. And the most tragic part is this: once excuses become habitual, you stop hearing them as excuses at all. They sound like realism. They sound like maturity. They sound like wisdom. But wisdom does not remove responsibility. it sharpens it. The Stoic approach to excuses is not emotional. It does not shame or insult. It observes. It asks one question repeatedly: is this within my control? If the answer is yes, excuses dissolve immediately. If the answer is no, attention shifts to response. There's no room for negotiation here. You either act where you can, or you accept where you cannot. Anything else is noise. Most people do not suffer because they lack ability. They suffer because they spend years negotiating with discomfort instead of confronting it. They bargain with effort. They dilute intention. They wait for motivation as if it were a moral authority rather than a fleeting emotion. The disciplined mind understands something crucial. You do not need to feel ready to act correctly. Readiness is a byproduct of action, not a prerequisite. Excuses delay exposure. They keep you from discovering what you are actually capable of enduring. You do not know your limits until excuses are removed. You do not know your strength until you are forced to rely on it. As long as excuses exist, your potential remains theoretical, never tested, never forged, never claimed. Destroying excuses is not about becoming harsh with yourself. It is about becoming honest. Honesty says, "This is uncomfortable, but it is necessary." Honesty says, "I am afraid, but fear does not decide." Honesty says, "This matters enough to act imperfectly." When excuses fall, something uncomfortable happens. Silence. No explanations, no stories, just choice. And in that silence, responsibility becomes unavoidable. This is why people cling to excuses so desperately. Without them, there is nowhere to hide. But there is also nowhere to lie. The Stoic chooses this clarity willingly. He would rather face the weight of responsibility than the erosion of self-respect. He understands that every excuse removed strengthens internal authority, and authority over oneself is the beginning of freedom. This is why excuses must be destroyed completely, not refined, not softened, not justified, not negotiated with, not replaced with better-sounding ones. Destroyed. Because the moment excuses die, action becomes possible, and action is the raw material of transformation. The destruction of laziness, the silent erosion of strength. Laziness rarely announces itself honestly. If it did, very few would tolerate it. It does not say, "I refuse to act." It says, "I'm tired." It says, "I need a break." It says, "I'll do it when my mind is clearer." It says, "I've earned rest." And sometimes these statements are true. This is what makes laziness so difficult to confront. It hides behind legitimate needs. It borrows the language of self-care, balance, and compassion, then quietly stretches those concepts until they become excuses for avoidance. Over time, the line between rest and retreat blurs. What once restored you begins to weaken you. The Stoics made a sharp distinction here, one most people never learn to make. Rest is intentional recovery. Laziness is unconscious escape. Rest prepares you to return to effort with clarity and strength. Laziness delays effort indefinitely while pretending to protect you. One serves life, the other avoids it. Laziness is not merely a lack of movement, it is a resistance to exertion of will. A lazy mind avoids friction. It seeks ease, not as a temporary refuge, but as a permanent condition. And when ease becomes the goal, growth becomes the enemy. This is why laziness is so corrosive. It does not collapse your life suddenly, it dissolves it gradually. A missed workout here, a postponed decision there, a habit abandoned quietly, a responsibility deferred without consequence at first. Days soften, standards lower, urgency fades,
And one day you look around and realize that your life feels smaller than it once did. Not because something was taken from you, but because you stopped reaching. The Stoics viewed effort not as a burden, but as a form of dignity. To exert oneself toward a chosen aim was proof of alignment between thought and action. Laziness, by contrast, fractured this alignment. The mind might still know what is right, but the body no longer obeys. This internal division breeds dissatisfaction, restlessness, and eventually contempt for oneself. Most people mistake laziness for lack of energy. In truth, laziness often creates fatigue. Avoidance drains more energy than effort ever will. The mind grows heavy under the weight of unfinished tasks and postponed decisions. What you resist does not disappear, it follows you, quietly demanding attention. Stoicism does not advocate constant strain, it advocates deliberate exertion. The disciplined life is rhythmic, not chaotic. Work is followed by rest. Effort is balanced with recovery. But this balance is governed by reason, not impulse. Ask yourself honestly, does this rest prepare me to return stronger, or does it delay my return indefinitely? Laziness also feeds on distraction. Modern life provides endless opportunities to escape effort without appearing idle. You can stay busy while avoiding what matters most. You can scroll, consume, organize, plan, and analyze endlessly, mistaking motion for progress. But movement without direction is merely noise. The Stoic cuts through this confusion by anchoring himself to essentials. He knows what must be done, and he does it first. Not because it feels good, but because it is necessary. Pleasure becomes a byproduct, not a requirement. Destroying laziness requires courage, not physical courage, but existential courage. The courage to sit with discomfort without numbing it. The courage to begin before clarity arrives. The courage to act while energy feels insufficient, trusting that energy follows movement. You do not wait until you feel capable. You act, and capability emerges. This is how strength is rebuilt, not through heroic bursts of motivation, but through daily agreements kept with oneself. Each small act of effort restores trust. Each refusal to escape sharpens will. Over time, laziness loses its camouflage. You begin to recognize it immediately, not as exhaustion, but as avoidance. And once seen clearly, it cannot survive. The Stoic does not punish himself for past inertia. He corrects course, calmly, repeatedly, without drama. He understands that discipline is not perfection. It is return. Return to effort. Return to responsibility. Return to alignment. When laziness is destroyed, something remarkable happens. Time expands. Days feel fuller. Confidence stabilizes. You begin to respect yourself again, not because you are achieving more, but because you are no longer betraying your own standards. This is the quiet power of effort reclaimed. The destruction of self-pity, the comfort that steals your strength. Self-pity does not arrive violently. It arrives softly, like a voice that claims to understand you better than anyone else. It says, "Of course you feel this way." It says, "Anyone in your position would struggle." It says, "You've been through more than most." And perhaps all of this is true. This is why self-pity is so difficult to uproot. It does not deny reality, it clings to it. It takes real pain, real injustice, real disappointment, and then builds a dwelling there. What begins as acknowledgement slowly becomes residence. You stop passing through suffering and start living inside it. The Stoics never denied pain, they denied enslavement to it. There is a profound difference between recognizing suffering and identifying with it. Recognition allows response. Identification removes choice. The moment pain becomes your identity, agency dissolves. You no longer ask, "What must I do?" You ask, "Why did this happen to me?" And that question, while understandable, leads nowhere useful. Self-pity feels compassionate, but it is secretly corrosive. It tells you that your circumstances excuse inaction, that your wounds absolve responsibility, that your suffering entitles you to stagnation. Over time, this mindset reshapes how you see yourself, not as a participant in life, but as a victim of it. And a victim, by definition, waits. The Stoic does not wait. He understands that the world is not obligated to be fair, and that pain is not a verdict on worth. Misfortune does not make you special, but it does make you tested. What matters is not the presence of hardship, but the posture you adopt in response to it. Self-pity narrows perception. It trains the mind to search for confirmation of injury rather than opportunity for action. You begin collecting evidence of how life has wronged you. Each memory becomes proof. Each setback reinforces the narrative. And slowly, quietly, you become loyal to your suffering because it explains why you haven't moved. This loyalty is deadly. The Stoics offered a different path, dignified endurance. Not numbness, not denial. Endurance rooted in reason. They believed that pain, when met correctly, could strengthen rather than shrink the soul. But this required refusing the emotional indulgence of self-pity. Ask yourself honestly, has dwelling on your pain ever built your strength or only prolonged it? There is a subtle arrogance hidden in self-pity. It assumes that one's suffering deserves special exemption from the demands of growth, that your burden is unique enough to suspend responsibility. The Stoic dismantles this illusion gently but firmly. He reminds himself, suffering is human, response is character. This does not mean suppressing emotion, it means governing it. Feeling pain is unavoidable, letting it decide your future is optional. When self-pity is removed, something uncomfortable emerges: accountability. Without the shelter of "poor me," you are left with the raw question of agency. What can I do now? Not what should have happened, not what others failed to do, but what remains within your control. This question is both frightening and liberating. Frightening because it strips away excuses, liberating because it returns power. The Stoic trains himself to shift focus immediately from emotion to action, not as a form of repression, but as a form of respect for life, for time, for potential. He allows grief to pass through him, but he does not kneel to it. He acknowledges loss, but he does not let it define him. This discipline does not harden the heart, it strengthens it. When self-pity is destroyed, resilience takes its place. You begin to see adversity not as a sentence, but as terrain, difficult, uneven, demanding, but navigable. You stop asking for life to be easier and start asking to be stronger. And that single shift changes everything. You may still feel pain, you may still remember injustice, but you no longer build your future around them. This is not coolness, it is maturity. And maturity is what allows a person to rise without bitterness.